Chapter 4, Medical, Legal, and Ethical Issues. Now, as we begin to consider what our legal responsibilities are, it's important to remember that laws differ from one location to another. State to state, typically, not necessarily between counties, although that is a possibility. So you as an EMR need to know the specific laws that apply to your state local jurisdiction. But the first thing that you should probably remember, and we've already talked about this in other chapters, is above all else, do no harm. If you're going to hurt the patient by what you're doing or what you're not going to do, well, then that's something that you need to consider changing, right? Everything you do, it should be with the full intention that I honestly want to help. I'm not trying to be a jerk, right? And as you're doing it, make sure that it's consistent care across the board, that you're compassionate, and that you're not losing your mind. You're maintaining your composure. Now, if you are employed as an EMR, you're going to be going to scenes where people are having a bad day, whether it's accident or illness. And when you're dispatched by an agency, you have a duty to act, which means you're on duty, you're employed at this location, and you are toned out to go. You have to go. You can't say, oh, that's just Grandma Grunt again, and I don't want to go on that call. No, that's not going to cut it. So when you're on an agency and you're being deployed, you don't get the choice of saying yes or no. I mean, you do, but then you stand the risk of being brought into court and asked, why did you not go? And if it was for the simple reason that you didn't want to and somebody was hurt, you could be in a whole lot of trouble. You need to get to the scene as quickly, as safe as possible, so that you can render care up to your level license. And failure to respond typically leaves you and your agency vulnerable to legal action. So what does that mean? Well, first off, standard of care. Standard of care is how you do all of the things that you do, right? So standard of care is if another EMR presented with the same situation does the same thing, well, then you're acting as a standard of care. As a trained EMR, you're expected to use your knowledge and your skills to the best of your ability under similar circumstances. If you're given the same scenario over and over and over again, same scene if it were, or as it were, you should be doing the same thing every time. And you have to treat the patient to the best of your ability. Your attitude is not required, okay? Your skill is. And make sure that you are providing a reasonable, you're providing care that a reasonable person under the same situation will do, right? It's the exact same concept as do unto others as you would have them do unto you type of thing. Now, scope of care, though, is what you can do, right? So standard of care is how you do it. Scope of care is what you can do. And these are the medical protocols. These are the standing orders, whether they be regional adopted or state adopted. We have state adopted protocols. And whenever there's a doubt of what you should do, what you can do, well, then you call online medical control authority. Now, when we talk about ethical responsibility, we're talking about treating somebody in an acceptable manner that conforms to our profession, right? That is hopefully not something that changes, but it's the way the community expects you to do things, right? It's doing so in a manner that is acceptable. What are some of the ways that we can do this to make sure that we're doing it right? Well, number one, stay up to date on skills and knowledge. We use the most appropriate skills with the most appropriate equipment and the most appropriate techniques, right? Now, yes, there's multiple different ways of doing things, and it's fine to try to do something different, but if you wanted to try something different, that's a whole different ball of wax. We don't do that. when we're caring for patients on a normal day. When we're done with a call, you review. How did that go? Did what I do work? Right? Evaluate your response times. Is there a different route that I could have taken to this location, or a response differently? Right? For your own sake and safety, and maybe you should try to follow up on how the patient came out. Did they do okay with what you did, or was there something that maybe we could have done better at? Always by taking additional classes. You're going to have more classes to take after this one. You're going to get your license, but then you need to maintain it, right? And maybe you would participate in some quality improvement activities, which might include new ways of doing things. Now, many people would say ethics is in the eye of the beholder, and that's true to an extent, but again, ethics is what is acceptable in society, right? And so, first off, we have to be honest. Always provide complete and correct reports to other EMS providers. Don't give them half of the story. And if there is an error, we need to correct it. And there are proper ways of correcting things. Ways that allow us to see first the initial report along with the corrections. Because if you just go and change things, it makes it look like you did it right the first time, or you reported it right the first time, that's not ethical. That's not what happened, right? It requires you to be very honest in what you're doing. Okay. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about consent for treatment. I'm asking the patient for their permission to treat them. Hi, my name is EMR Robertson. I'm here with the rescue squad. Can I help you today? Right? I'm asking for permission. Now, this is, when they say, yes, please help me, that's expressed consent, right? They have said, yes, I would like you to help you. Whether that's a head nod or an agreement or an actual, hey, I would like some more information on this. So express consent is, hey, can I help you? They say yes. Hey, can I help you? No. Well, if I don't, this, and this are going to be happening. I call that the good, the bad, the ugly. And if you give them the good, the bad, the ugly, and say, whoa, yeah, help me, now it's informed consent, right? They know why you're helping, right? Very rarely have I heard it called actual consent, but that's something to be aware of, especially in the legal world where there's a line somewhere that says actual consent. You're like, what does that mean? Well, now you know, right? And to give consent, a patient must actually be of a legal age to make a rational decision. We're talking about people age of 18 or better. Not better is the wrong term, or older, okay? Now, there is such thing as people that can consent beyond that, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, okay? Now, we have implied consent. Now, this is consent where we can operate and help people based on what would happen in a normal situation. These are patients that are unconscious, unresponsive. These are patients who perhaps are not AO4. They're not awake, alert, and oriented to times, person, place, and event. They don't know who they are, why they are, what's going on. They might be awake and they might be answering questions, but they're not really with it. Then you would help them under implied consent, right? And we can do that for patients that can't make decisions for themselves initially. Like I'm thinking about Alzheimer's patients. They can't make their own decisions. Dementia patients, and even minors. Because minors cannot consent to treat, right? Now, if they say, will you please help me? And there's no adult around, I can help them because of implied consent. It would be assumed that any adult human would want their child helped in the event of an emergency. So when we say consent for minors, we're not saying a minor consents. We're saying due to implied consent, then, yes, we can treat them, okay? When we're talking about minors with consent also, we have to wait with or wait until the patient until the legal guardian of the patient consents to treatment. Now, you can do that over the phone, assuming you can corroborate that this is actually somebody that you should be talking about. But again, if this is a life threat, we have to take care of the kid, the pediatric patient, the person underneath the age of 18. Well, then I can absolutely help them as implied consent until I make contact with the guardian, and then they say, well, no, I'll take care of it, or whatever. Okay. So, finishing up this thought process, we'll talk about patients with mental illness. Now, if a patient has said, I'm going to commit suicide, I'm going to kill myself, the patient no longer has a right to refuse care. They are going to get care whether they want it or not, because it's illegal to kill yourself, right? Punishable by death. I'm just joking. But you cannot say, I'm going to kill myself, and then say, never mind, I was just joking, right? If a patient, even if they don't say it, if they appear to be a threat to themselves or others, then we can place them under medical care for their own safety. Now, we have to be very careful handling this, because it borders on the line of kidnapping and assault and battery. So be very careful. But in these instances, I would totally get law enforcement involved. Now, along with all of this, we talked earlier about the when can a minor consent. There are some times when they can. If they are emancipated. Now, I don't know if this goes farther. I didn't see it in your textbook, but I think you should need to know this. Emancipated minors that have been basically divorced from their parents, they can refuse treatment, but there have to be paperwork there, okay? Also, if they serve in the military, they would have to have parental permission to serve in the military under the age of 18. Now because they serve in the military, now they can make their own decisions. If they're married before the age of 18, again, the parents have to sign off on that in that instance, because they're already married, then they have their own rights to make their decisions. Okay? And so those are some of the things that would go towards a minor, someone under the age of 18, being able to consent for themselves. Okay? Now, there will be time when the ambulance is called, the rescue team is called, y'all get out there, and the patient says, never mind, I don't want to go, or someone called and they shouldn't have, or whatever. A competent adult who is in their right mind has a legal right to refuse treatment, even if that means they could be injured or killed. If I can tell you who I am, where I am, why I am, what's going on, blah, 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 you have no grounds to treat me against my will. If I don't want help, you can't make me. Now, that's also assuming that I haven't hurt myself on purpose to create this situation. But when that happens, we need to help that person understand the consequences of refusing care by explaining the treatment. If I don't help you with this specific treatment plan, this is probably what's going to go on with you, right? To include death or whatever. You explain the reason why I need to do something. Maybe some of the risks and alternative treatments that might help. These are the things that you can do to try to help them understand that refusing treatment may not be a good idea, right? When you refuse, if your area allows it, and Michigan does, there's a Michigan EMR refusal out there. Patient refusals need to be documented on your PCR, whether that is a written document or the online stuff. Most of the time it's more online now. And we need a signature from them that says, I understand. And you need a counter signature, a witness to this, okay? Because we don't just leave people because they don't want to go. We do our due diligence to make sure that we've taken care of our citizens. Because without that, we're just going to be back there later on. Some of the things you may encounter from a legal standpoint, they're called advanced directives. And an advanced directive is a document that tells you what a person would like or would like not to be done during their medical call, if you will. For instance, my grandmother, her advanced directive was, if you can give me drugs and oxygen to make me feel better, super, do that all day long. But if you need to do CPR or shock me, I don't want that. I don't want a tube in my throat, right? And so that's an advanced directive. And they have to be written out and signed by the doctor, signed by the patient. People, and there needs to be copies of these things next to the patient. It can't be, well, it's somewhere. No, it's got to be right there with them. Otherwise, it's not applicable, right? And a living will is the same kind of concept as it moves forward with, different long-term cares, okay? So when we talk about some other things, we have the durable power of attorney, right? And this is a document that allows somebody, and it might be a relative, but it might not be, to make medical decisions on behalf of that patient. Again, that piece of paper needs to be there with them, right? A DNR is actually a written statement signed by doctor and patient that I don't want you to do anything. If I go into arrest, let me go. I don't want anything done. Okay? Does that make sense? There are other kind of orders as well. You might hear of a MOLST or a POLST. It's a medical orders for life-sustaining treatment or physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment. These type of things might be used as different terminology, but basically it's the written and signed advanced directives that we're supposed to do in a given situation that may or may not be inside of our standard of care. And if all else, if you are unable to determine if a directive or a document is legal, you just start care. You err on the side of life, okay? You start with life and you go the other way because it's assumed most people want life, right? Some will have a bracelet, a medical alert bracelet or a necklace or something that identifies what the patient has, advanced directives or medical conditions or whatever. And it will give you some clues as to where to look next for the rest of it. Here's a tricky one right here, abandonment. Abandonment occurs, I'm going to read this one straight up because this one's really tough to take. Abandonment occurs when a trained person begins emergency care and then leaves before someone else takes over. Now, you being an EMR, when you're helping a patient, you can transfer care to another medical professional, an EMT, another EMR, an advanced EMT, a paramedic, who you can, on scene. Who you cannot transfer care to is a nurse or a doctor. Unless that nurse or doctor are going with them to the hospital, there is nobody pre-hospital that is more highly qualified in the field than a medic, right? So if you start treatment on the patient and you decide, well, I've got to go to work, see ya, that's abandonment, right? So once you start treatment, you got to continue it at least until somebody else arrives and takes over. You can't just leave, right? That's not good. You may come across people, you probably will, come across people dead on scene. If it looks like they're alive, if they're moving, if they're breathing, start treatment. Begin providing care. But you can assume a person is dead if they don't have a head. If their head is removed from the body, there is zero reason for you to start care because there's no hope for life. Rigor mortis, you know what I'm talking about, is when they're stiff. You don't need to start work. They're dead. They're not coming back. Tissue decomp, they're kind of squishy or gross, right? Like those dead deer alongside of the road, we're not going to help them because they're dead. And then dependent lividity. Now that is something interesting when I say dependent lividity, so you got rigor mortis, which is the stiffness, but you have livor mortis, dependent lividity, where all of the fluids inside the body pool at the lowest point to the center of the earth, right? So if I'm laying on my back and rear end and the back sides of my legs and arms are going to look bruised. Why? Because all of the blood in my body is pooled in that location. So while rigor mortis may have not set in fully yet, that dependent lividity, if I see that, that's grounds to not even start as well. And just so you know, rigor mortis sets in, then releases, and then sets in again. So you might be in that window that it releases, and they've been dead for quite some time. If a person is dead, consider not only the patient's demise, if you will, but you have to know what your protocol is. Do you move the body? Do you not move the body? Right? Depends on where it's at and what's going on. Typically on a scene, you're going to need to have law enforcement out there to do a reconstruction. And if a person's dead, and obviously dead, we're going to stand by right there. We're not going to move the body around. A real quick note on people dead on scene. It goes with crime scene investigations. And if the person is dead, you can walk in and they're rigor mortis. I think of a gentleman who died with his head on his table. So head in his hands on his table. And when we pulled him back to check his pulse, his head and hands stayed together as we pulled him back. He was obviously dead. We put him right back where we found him and we walked out. That's the way it should happen because there's no reason to move him or mess around. We had to wait for the coroner. And we didn't go back into that house again because it's no longer in our purview to do anything. That's not our job other than to secure the scene and allow no one in or out other than authorized personnel. Now we have talked about the duty to act, right? Remember a couple of slides ago when we were talking about the duty to act. When we don't do our job, when we don't meet the standard of care, we could be guilty of negligence. Okay? And not even negligence, but gross negligence, which could be really bad. We could lose our license and go to jail. But these conditions here need to be present in order for a lawyer or a law person to prove you negligence. Number one, you had a duty to act. You were on shift, you were at the station, you were whatever you were, and tones went out and you didn't go on the call. Right? However, if you weren't at that location, maybe you didn't have the duty to act. So that's the first thing they've got to do. Then, not only did you have the duty to act, you chose not to. A breach of duty. And not only that, did it have a proximate cause? Did what you do or not do create additional injury, illness, pain, and suffering to the patient? Right? So as we're talking about these things, that is what we have to remember as as we're considering what negligence might mean for us in the field. Because gone are the days that the king can do no wrong. Just because you're trying to help doesn't mean you just get to, perform field surgery because I'm trying to help. No, it doesn't work that way. Also, confidentiality. Man, talk about legal thises and that's. Confidentiality. Most of the patient's information is confidential. And we're talking about patient history, patient demographics, what did you find when you're helping them, what did you do for the patient, and how did you communicate with the patient. There is a small window of training that you could use some of the information for, but typically speaking, if you're going to report to a squad, hey, we had this interesting call, if you tell them, I went on Sally Sadheart, she's 59 and she lives at 123, I don't give a crap way, You know, you're giving them everything so that the patient can be identified, right? So we only share information of this sensitive nature with other medical care personnel who are directly involved in patient care, not you know Tommy gossip that's down the road and wants to know what's going on because you heard it go out over the radio. Now, yes, there are times when you can release confidential information, but it is court ordered at that time. It is run by HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act from 1996. It is a protection law for the patient. Now, some might say, well, if I stop and help, I'm acting in the capacity of a good Samaritan. Well, that only applies if you have no medical licensure whatsoever, because a good Samaritan doesn't know anything. So if they stop and render care in the best of goodwill that they possibly can, and they wind up hurting them, no, nothing can really be done to them. But you being a licensed individual in the state of Michigan, and you screw up and hurt somebody, well, you're still on the hook for that, right? Now, it is variable from state to state, but you need to be making sure that you don't allow for a legal option to be taken against you based on what you're doing. So make sure that you're covered yourself by the law, at least. Obviously, there's tons of regulations that we need to consider, but you need to be familiar with it. You can't just assume, well, I didn't know that, so it doesn't apply to me. No, ignorance of the law is not a defense. To be licensed in the state of Michigan, you have to be certified by National Registry and apply for a license in the state of Michigan. Certification comes from National Registry. Licensure comes from the state of Michigan. And you are responsible for your certifications, nobody else. So if you say, well, it's the fire department's responsibility to keep me up to date. No, your name is attached to that, not your fire department's. They don't control your license, you do. Things that need to be reported because they happened. Here's a list. But it would seem logical. These are additional reports that you need to tell law enforcement, maybe talk to the hospital, ensure that the responding crews know about this, but they've been stabbed, they've been shot, they've been in a vehicle crash. You suspect some form of abuse, whether it's against a child or an elder or against a loved one, any dog bite, and definitely any rape. All of these things are reportable offenses. These are mandatory reports. If it's found that you don't report and you knew about it, well, now you're held on the hook for that same negligence cause. You had a duty to act and you didn't do it. And again, you have to know which are reportable crimes in our areas. The list right here, that's the list right there. There's really nothing else that you need to know about. Let's go talk about crime scenes real brief. Many scenes also have a medical or even a traumatic component. We need to make sure that we're protecting ourselves. We have the proper PPEs on, but we need to make sure if the scene is safe before you go in. So we stage away from the scene until law enforcement calls us in. This goes directly to the threatening suicide. I'm going to kill myself. Well, I'm not going to go storming in there like Johnny Badbutt. I'm going to let law enforcement trained to de-escalate that, take care of that first, then call us in. After my safety comes the patient's safety. So after I'm safe, then the patient, right? Then the crew, then everybody else. These are things to consider when we're talking about what scene to go on and what scene not to go on. Make sure that whatever you assess, you're documenting so that when questioned and it looks like you should have gone on scene, you can say, well, I didn't go on scene because blah, 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 and not it wasn't needed, it wasn't needed, it wasn't needed. Again, move patients only if necessary. There was one crime scene that I was on where the patient was murdered, and I got there and law enforcement wanted confirmed death and said, "You follow me directly in." Went straight in on the path, didn't turn to the left or to the right, went right to the patient, put the electrodes on, left the electrodes on, checked the patient. The patient was dead, dead, dead. Confirmed death, called it in, and I left back the same way. If we needed to touch something, make sure you know what you did so that you can report it out. If you need to move something to get to a patient, again, fine, but make sure that you note it. Because if we just move the crime scene willy-nilly around, we're messing it up so the bad guys can't be caught. And don't cut through bullet holes or knife wounds that are through the clothing. We're going to have to cut clothing off, but let's not use the holes created by these weapons because they'll use that in the forensic analysis. Again, be careful where you place equipment. We don't want to set it down in a pool of blood or on top of a needle or any of these other things. Anybody that's not supposed to be there, stay out. Now, that scene I was telling you about earlier where we had the patient die face down, there was one person on the fire department that thought that they had to go in there and do the police's job by looking around for clues. And walked in, and I'm like, "Get out of here. Get out. You don't belong in there." And I had to kick them out, right? Make sure the law enforcement has been called and is on scene, and then maybe a little report in paper to turn into command if you don't have an online portion of reports that you do, okay? Documentation, if you write it down, it better have happened, and if it happened, you better have written it down. It is your legal record of your treatment. Because chances are, it's going to be years before this is pulled to court, if ever. And you're going to need to have those notes in front of you, based on your report, to help you reconstruct the day. Okay? It gives us a place to start. And I say us, that's the legal people. It should be clear, concise, accurate, and readable. If you're writing it still by hand, then you need to print, and it needs to be legible. Most places now are using the online access, which is far, far better because now it's typed, right? How did I find the patient? When we went on scene? What was the problem? What did I do? What were the vitals? Was anybody else there? Do I need to report anything? All of this needs to be documented for the safety of everybody involved, but more importantly, for the ongoing treatment of the patient. All right, so we've come through now Chapter 4, Med Legal Ethical, and here's a quick summary. Here's a couple of things that you just need to keep in your brain, the most important things, if you will. As an EMR, you have a duty to act when you are dispatched to a medical call as part of your official duties. You should understand the differences between consent, implied consent, consent for minors, consent of patients with mental illness, and right to refuse care. Those are all things that you need to remember, right? So circle back if you don't remember. Advanced directives give a patient the right to have care withheld. I don't want this. I want that. Or I don't want that. I want this. And you should understand the concepts of abandonment, negligence, confidentiality, as well as the purpose of Good Samaritan laws, right? Remember, Good Samaritan laws are not there to protect you. They're there to protect John Q. Public that wants to try to help. And finally, make sure that the certain events that deal with diseases, abuse, illegal acts, they're reported to the proper authorities, not just going, that's nice. Crime scene operations are a complex environment. Always defer to law enforcement on crime scene. Unless there's a patient that needs to be taken care of, because you're in charge of the patient. And remember, your job is not complete until the paperwork is done. You can't just walk away going, that was nice, and then go on and do something else. No, you need to write a report on that to make sure that you can remember it accurately and you can help other people with that report. Now, understanding these concepts is going to help you be the best EMR out there. That, friends, is chapter 4.